Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really highly structured socioeconomic philosophy known as Black American Parallel Systems, or B.A.P.S for short. Now, this is a movement entirely focused on building independent infrastructure, but we're going to look at it through a very specific and honestly fascinating lens today. We're going to tackle the core vulnerability that this movement's doctrine addresses head-on, the hidden structural danger of isolated independence. Think about it. What happens when you try to build a stronghold completely by yourself? In a modern economy where survival requires interconnected resources, trying to stand as an island isn't just difficult, it's a massive vulnerability. Let's find out why.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the danger of isolation. Second, the B.A.P.S blueprint. Then, the 4 core pillars, followed by the architects of sovereignty. And finally, building the future today.
All right, part 1. The danger of isolation. Let's look at a real-world scenario.
To truly understand this movement, we have to look at the exact problem they're trying to solve. I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind. What actually happens when independence is isolated? It sets up a huge blind spot. Imagine trying to build a single pillar of sovereignty, like growing your own food or maybe starting a local business, but without a supportive, protective ecosystem around you. Being isolated in our modern societal matrix means that the second your success threatens an established interest, you're entirely on your own to defend it, and that is a very dangerous place to be.
Picture this. A builder does everything exactly right. She masterfully executes agricultural independence by securing land and running a thriving organic farm. But because she was acting as an island within the mainstream matrix, she was completely exposed. Her land suddenly gets threatened by 500 acres of corporate data centers moving in to swallow up the acreage. Because she didn't have a parallel political or legal infrastructure to shield her, the situation escalated into terrifying SWAT raids at her private home. She had to drain her life savings, shelling out $25,000 in defensive legal fees just to fight for the right to keep land she already owned. This is the sheer exhaustion, the financial drain, and the extreme emotional weight of fighting a solitary battle against a massive, connected machine.
Which brings us to a pretty uncompromising takeaway from the movement, a total paradigm shift in how they view self-reliance. The B.A.P.S editorial board states, quote, "The dominant society will never protect a sovereign Black institution. According to their doctrine, expecting external systems like mainstream zoning boards, local detectives, or external forces to step in and protect parallel builders isn't just naive, it's a fatal mathematical error. The system, they argue, simply was not built to protect them, so expecting it to do so is a strategic failure that always ends in ruin."
Moving right along to Section 2, the B.A.P.S blueprint. It's time for proactive building.
So, how exactly do they solve this? They completely pivot the strategy from defensive exhaustion to proactive offense through B.A.P.S, which again stands for Black American Parallel Systems. The source documents define it as a blueprint for the conscious public building of independent systems designed to protect, sustain, and prosper foundational Black Americans entirely outside of mainstream structures. Their core objective? Absolute self-reliance. Notice that they aren't trying to fix or reform the mainstream matrix. They're seeking to bypass it entirely by building, owning, and governing their own interlocking solutions.
And they actually have a formalized blueprint that lays this all out. It's not just abstract theory, it's a mapped-out structure for creating parallel networks. They run this whole operation alongside a dedicated Discord community, which essentially acts as a living educational hub. This is where they equip their members with highly practical, real-world skills needed to thrive off the grid. We're talking everything from advanced urban farming and secure cryptocurrency trading to setting up independent community security protocols. They're literally training people to operate outside the traditional system.
Just think about how different this is from your standard political movement. Their governing doctrine dictates a very strict rule: action over optics. The movement explicitly rejects protesting, petitioning, or begging for inclusion in a system that they believe fundamentally extracts their value. They state that history is full of talkers, but they are a movement of builders. They prioritize raw, physical infrastructure building over political rhetoric. It's entirely focused on what they can construct with their own hands, rather than what they can convince others to give them.
That brings us to Section 3, the 4 core pillars, how they bypass the matrix.
So the crucial point to understand here is their structural foundation. To bypass the matrix, they break survival down into 4 interconnected networks: economic independence, sustainable living and agriculture, health and wellness, and complete self-governance. The doctrine stresses that these pillars act as an interlocking shield. You absolutely cannot build just one. Remember that isolated organic farmer we talked about earlier? She executed the sustainable living pillar perfectly, but without the other three pillars protecting her, like an economic war chest to fight legal battles or self-governance to handle community policing, she was left completely exposed.
Abstract ideas are great, but they don't mean much without concrete systems. To prevent external sabotage, they translate these pillars into reality. For economic independence, they've launched independent cryptocurrency networks like FBA Coin alongside established barter ecosystems. Sustainable living translates to off-grid communities and localized food sovereignty projects. Health and wellness is addressed through holistic infrastructure like community-based doula networks. And complete self-governance? That becomes a reality through autonomous community protection and policing, ensuring they aren't having to dial out for their own safety.
They're quite literally hitting the pavement to test these systems out. A prime example is how they integrate physical commerce with their community token at events like the $1 FBA Coin Community Marketplace. This is a crucial step to stop wealth from bleeding out into mainstream corporations. By hosting localized markets that run on their own currency, they create a living, self-contained trade ecosystem. It keeps their capital circulating internally, completely shielded from mainstream banking whims.
Next up, Section 4, the Architects of Sovereignty. Let's look at the ideological foundation.
To legitimize these strict strategies, the B.A.P.S. movement draws its blueprint directly from history, but through a highly specific filter. The sources note a really sharp contrast in how they choose their historical heroes. While mainstream activism often highlights figures who gave grand speeches or appeal to the dominant society for inclusion, the B.A.P.S. doctrine rejects that metric completely. They select their heroes based strictly on institutional sovereignty. They don't value speeches, they value bricks, mortar, and land. The only question they ask is, did this person lay down literal physical infrastructure and build autonomous economic networks?
Let's start with Madame C.J. Walker. She is anchored as the pillar of independent manufacturing. The movement reveres her because she didn't seek external validation or mainstream backing. Instead, she built a massive manufacturing and distribution empire entirely on her own terms. She controlled her own supply chain, which the movement views as the ultimate equalizer. When you control the supply chain, you remove the ability of external suppliers to choke out your business. It creates an impenetrable foundation for parallel wealth.
Then you have Maggie Lena Walker, representing the pillar of economic independence. If Madame C.J. Walker built the products, Maggie Lena Walker built the vault. She became the first black woman to charter a bank in the U.S., effectively creating a parallel banking system. Closed-loop banking is utterly vital for this movement because it bypasses predatory institutions, protects community assets from discriminatory lending, and allows capital to circulate internally for mortgages and localized savings.
Now, what's really interesting is how this doctrine views Fannie Lou Hamer. Mainstream history overwhelmingly focuses on her voting rights speeches, but B.A.P.S. honors her as the pillar of sustainable living specifically for executing massive agricultural infrastructure. By launching the Freedom Farm Cooperative and securing 680 acres in 1969, she completely bypassed the exploitative sharecropping matrix. She literally took ownership of the earth to feed her community directly.
Finally, there's Nannie Helen Burroughs as the pillar of self-governance. She founded the National Training School for Women and Girls, and she explicitly funded it through grassroots community contributions. She wholly rejected outside mainstream philanthropy because she understood a fundamental truth of this movement. Outside money always comes with outside interference. By rejecting those funds, she maintained absolute, uncompromised institutional control over the education of her community.
Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, Building the Future Today, Collective Infrastructure.
As we wrap up this explainer, you can really see the movement's dedication to building a comprehensive collective infrastructure. This right here is their official sign-off mantra. We are building in public. We are taking ownership of our future. The future is what we build today. Take ownership, govern yourself. It's a constant, urgent call to action, and it directly answers the tragedy of the isolated organic farmer we discussed at the very beginning. You cannot survive as an island. You have to build interconnected pillars so that when one part of the community is attacked, the rest of the infrastructure stands ready to defend it.
And that leaves us with one powerful, provocative question derived straight from their editorial board. After seeing the deep exhaustion and vulnerability of isolated independence versus the structural, interlocking safety of parallel systems, are you ready to transition from fighting the matrix alone to building the collective perimeter needed to protect your land? It's a fascinating look at the absolute necessity of comprehensive, self-reliant ecosystems in our modern world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the systems around you are built.